Hi, Tyler Thurman here with Tyler Thurman Coaching. Some of you know me as Coach Ty from my blog and online persona. And today's video is titled, Are We a Body or Are We a Mind? And I chose this topic because it is just such an incredibly valuable distinction. And it can really be boiled down to the question of who are we? Who are we as human beings all together? And it just so happens that most people haven't actually spent much time asking themselves that question. And so they won't really have a ready answer, but there will be a default. Most people default to a couple different ideas that they have about themselves. And one of the predominant ones is we think we are our bodies. And it's not really anybody's fault that we think that. And it actually makes perfect sense that we think that because we live in a body-obsessed, body-worshipping world culture. And I can point to a number of different things that will illustrate that. Namely, the world's economy is largely driven by products and services that are designed and associated around the body. You've got the markets of beauty, so you've got things like clothes and makeup and plastic surgery, those kinds of things. You've got the industries of health and fitness, which are pretty much exclusively about keeping the body fit and conditioned, keeping in good shape, prolonging old age and the eventual decay of the body. And you've got fields designed around sex, which, sex is pretty much exclusively to do with the body, right? And pleasure. And then you've got the fields of medicine and pharmaceuticals, which are to do with in large part, keeping us alive as long as possible, right? But it's also a denying the inevitable. I actually remember having a conversation with one of my good friends that was in medical school at the time. He's now a doctor. But he told me, he said he realized after a certain point through medical school that the point of medicine seems to be to try to keep people alive forever or indefinitely. And they seem to kind of ignore the inevitable fate of the body, which is death. And he thought that was a little disturbing, that something so obvious could be so largely put aside or ignored or repressed. And so it makes sense that we think we're bodies, right? Because everything around us is kind of focused on the body. It's like, I want to get a better body, a more beautiful body, a healthier body. I want to fix my body, and almost all of it is in an attempt to feel better, have a more wonderful experience of life, because a lot of us find ourselves fairly miserable, fairly insecure, depressed, anxious, afraid, stressed. We're not having a great time here. And because the world around us is so focused on the body, and it tells us, there's a lot of myths out there that if we can get our bodies right, we can get them, perfect or better or improved, more beautiful, sexier, stronger, more athletic, then our lives will get markedly better. And I'm here to bust up that myth a little bit, because I actually worked in the field of health and fitness for quite some time as a personal trainer for a number of years. And let me be the first to tell you that the practitioners in that field, who typically have incredible bodies, just incredibly fit, incredibly beautiful, attractive, strong, fit, the professions of medicine, health and fitness, personal trainers, exercise, class instructors, models, nutritionists, you name it. They are every bit as insecure and neurotic about their bodies as everyone else, if not more so. A lot of them are so focused on the body that they're even more miserable and neurotic and anxious and insecure for that very reason, because they're so focused on it and identifying with the body. So I've got, I already kind of touched on this, but I have some bad news when it comes to the body, which is the body is designed to decay, gradually break down, and die. And that will happen 100% of the time. I was talking to my wife who works in medicine the other day, and she was mentioning some disease that had like an 80% mortality rate, something like Ebola. And a thought came into my head, and I was like, you know what? That's actually better than the human condition, or the condition of the body, which is 100% mortality rate. And that happens to be a fact that the world and those industries tend to ignore, obscure, hide, not tell us. We all know it, but we're kind of in denial about it. So that's kind of the bad news, right? And it would be worse if we actually were our bodies. Because here's what's on offer. I mean, that is what's on offer if we are our bodies. If that's it. We're just these, as I call them sometimes, meat suits. We are these meat suits, and we're just kind of walking around, and we're born, and we grow up until the age of about 20, 25, somewhere in there. And then we decline, we decay, we get sick. Gradually more and more sick, our bodies gradually break down, and then we die. That's what's on offer. What else is on offer if we think that's it, if that's all there is to us, is incredible insecurity, anxiousness, and a sense of separation. Because if we are a body, that means that we are separate from everything else, including anything that we think is God or divine or spiritual. Because bodies, by their very nature and definition, are separate. They have edges. They have clear defined borders, which means there's this body and then there's other bodies. And so we're pretty much alone. You know, we try to connect as bodies to other bodies, you know, through things like sex and physical proximity. But if you've played that game for any period of time, you know that's pretty fleeting. You know that that doesn't really offer you what we're looking for, which is a deep sense of spiritual connection, in my experience. And so the picture is pretty bleak if all we are these bodies, right? And it actually makes sense to try to desperately cling to the body and prolong its decay, or hold on to your physical beauty and attractiveness as long as humanly possible through things like, you know, plastic surgery and, you know, clothes that make you look thinner than you are, and makeup that hides things that you think are blemishes. And it makes sense that you'd have low self-esteem because, you know, your body is going to decay. And so if you're highly identified with a decaying organism, well, why shouldn't you have low self-esteem? Because that sucks, right? That's pretty terrible. And so it's not a pretty picture. And so I hope you can begin to see that it makes perfect sense why, as long as we're identified with the body so heavily, that we would be fairly neurotic and anxious and insecure and terrified of death and the decay of the body, because that's us, according to us, right? That we think that that's us, and so we think that as the body goes, we go. And the body has a predictable trajectory, which is death. The good news and the silver lining to it all is that, as far as I can tell, we are not a body. We are not these bodies. We are not our bodies. We have them, which I think is important, because a lot of people will hear what I'm about to say as, okay, I'm going to ignore my body, I'm going to forsake my body, I'm going to just kind of leave my body to rot and not take care of it in any way, shape, or form. But that's actually another form of identification with the body. That's making it important by hating it as opposed to love and obsessing over it. And any form of worship or obsession or hatred towards the body is an identification with the body. And as we were just talking about, to the extent you identify with the body is the degree to which you're going to suffer throughout your experience of life, because the body's kind of designed to go downhill and to have a lot of pain and ailments, and things go wrong with it. So I'm not saying leave the body and just completely ignore it, don't take care of it. I would never tell you that, because we have bodies. We aren't our bodies, but we have them. So as long as we appear to have them, we might as well take care of them. So now that I got that out of the way, if we're not bodies, then what are we? That I think is a beautiful question, because there's a lot of other things that we think we are that we aren't. The other sort of big one, the big elephant in the room, is we think that we are our experiences. And another way to say that is we think we are our personality, which we think is shaped by experience. But if you've sort of explored my work in any more depth, you'll know that our experience of life 100% comes from thought. We feel our thinking. We experience our thinking about the world, about the body. And those are our experiences. But thought is illusory. It's transitory. It's nebulous. You can't grab onto it. It's not really real, in other words. And so our experiences and any thoughts that we have about ourselves, which are almost exclusively neurotic and insecure and self-loathing, and they're upsetting. They're thoughts of separation and loneliness and depression and devastation. But the good news is we aren't our thoughts about ourselves or our bodies either. So you can have thoughts that aren't true. If you explore them long enough, you'll find most of them aren't true. But sort of the heart of the work that I do is looking to truth. I don't claim to know the full truth, but I do think that I've glimpsed it. I've at least begun to glimpse it, because I think I'm looking in the right direction. And I think that because there's the ring of truth that most people will hear in what I'm about to say, which is we are spiritual beings. And that one of the ways that I talk about that is I talk about us as mind, or a mind, which is one of the principles in the three principles. And that is another way of saying that we are of God. We are children of God. We are children of mind. We are extensions of a non-physical spiritual energy that is actually split. Right? I'm going to talk about more of that in another video and another article. But let's suffice it to say that one half of the split is kind of a lie. It's the ego mind. But the other half, which is the real us, which is not an illusion, it's the truth, is the mind of God, an extension of the mind of God. And that mind, that true us, that essential self, that non-conditioned self, or unconditioned self, that diamond in the rough, it is untouched by the experiences that we have in this world, the thoughts that we have in this world, and the things that happen to us in this world of form, this physical world, the world of bodies. It is untouched by all of that, and it's made of love. It's made of peace, and it's made of a deep connection, a deep oneness. So we're not all individual minds. We are of the same mind, of the same spirit that knows only love, unconditional love. One of my favorite definitions of unconditional love is that there's nothing you can do to make God love you any more, and nothing you could do to make God love you any less. We are that. We are that mind. We are that source. We are that source of creativity, that source of wisdom, that source of love and connection and peace. That's us. That is the very fabric of who we are. And we have fallen asleep to that. I don't really know why. I don't really know how. But I know that that is the direction of truth. I know I can't really do mind justice with words. But I can point you in the direction of the truth of who you are. And I've worked with enough people, I've had enough experiences of this myself to know that there's something to see if you look for it. It's just that most of us are we've so given our allegiance, we've so invested in ourselves as these bodies, as these separate selves, as these neurotic personalities that have to do with our thinking separate thoughts. We're so invested in ourselves as that and too busy with that we haven't taken the time to question if that's us. We haven't taken the time to look in a different direction of truth. Because we think just because we feel upset or anxious or stressed a lot of the time, we haven't questioned is that actually us, or is that just an experience passing through a mind, a split mind? And is there an essential self to us beyond the body, beyond a sense of a separate self, beyond the ego, beyond the personality? And that's where I would point you. And the reason I talk about our identification with the body and our identification with our thoughts about the body and our identification with our feeling experiences, the unhealthy normal, I think, as one of my mentors, Michael Neal, calls it. We identify with those, but we don't have room then. We don't have a willingness then to see through those things because we're so attached to them. And so we're not really in a place usually where we're open enough to even have the conversation about, well, who am I? Because we're so sure of who we are. But the beauty of it is that we can be wrong about ourselves. And let me tell you, I was wrong about myself for a long time. I thought that I was broken, fundamentally flawed, a neurotic, anxious, insecure human being. And I was my body, you know. And I never had really good thoughts about my body, even though my body's okay, right? The ego thought system, the separate self, is designed to think upsetting thoughts about itself. Never content, never peaceful, never loving, unconditionally loving. But if you look in that direction, and if you kind of know where not to look, that's why I'm talking about these identifications, because it's really helpful to know where not to look. And you begin to see that it's not out there. It's, you know, who you are doesn't have anything to do with what you accomplish. It doesn't have anything to do with what you accumulate. It doesn't have anything to do with this body that is born and dies. It doesn't have anything to do with your thoughts about your body. It doesn't even have anything to do with your neuroses, your psychology. It has everything to do with what you have forgotten about yourself. That we are, as I think a spiritual teacher, Ramtha, talks about us human beings as the forgotten gods. Well, we have forgotten our divinity. We've forgotten who we really are. And really all of the problems that we face in this physical world are to do with and stem from our heavy identification with a false self. It could be the body. It could be our thoughts about the body. It could be our thoughts about ourself. It could be anything. But it's to do with a case of mistaken identity. We have a fundamental misunderstanding about who we are. And so long as we have an identification with something that we are not, we're going to suffer. We're going to experience loneliness, separation, depression, anxiety, fear. Those are all sources, or those are all effects of the source of a misidentification. And so then, as you slowly see, oh, it's not there, it's not in the body, it's not in the brain, because the brain is part of the body, is part of this mind, this non-physical source essence that is the source of love. It's made of love. It's made of peace. It's the source of your new, creative, fresh thinking. It's the source of your peace of mind, your innate well-being that can't be altered. It's always there, waiting for you to acknowledge it, waiting for your willingness to see more of it. And so that's really all you have to do to begin to have a more wonderful life. Because let me tell you, your life will transform when you begin to see more and more of who you really are, this beautiful mind essence. It will transform as your identification and your allegiance switches. Begin to see, wow, maybe I'm not my body. Maybe I'm not these miserable thoughts, these thoughts of a separate self, of an anxious self, of an insecure self. Maybe we are all connected through a mind, a singular mind, a beautiful, loving essence that is us. And so you don't have to do anything to become more of who you really are. You simply have to begin to see through the illusions that you've created, that we've all created about who we are, but who we actually aren't. You know, this is a world of false idols, as I call it. Because everything in it is kind of designed to be worshipped and distract us from the beauty within. Not within the body, but within the mind. And so you got to know where not to look first. It's not out there. It's not here. It's the essence of who you are. And all you have to do is keep looking and stay in the conversation. Doesn't have to be with me, but just stick with it. It takes some uncovering. It takes your eyes, not your physical eyes, your spiritual eyes, some time to adjust to the light, because you're not used to looking in the direction of your true, beautiful self. But it will reveal itself to you, and you will recognize it as your homecoming. Everybody does. And so that's what's on offer. If you can begin to release yourself from your identification with the body or any false self, that's what's on offer. A more wonderful life, a more beautiful life, a life of unconditional love, a life of peace, a life of joy. And guess what? That tends to help the body. have a more pleasant experience here. That tends to help us in our physical endeavors, our creative endeavors, our work endeavors, our relationship endeavors. It helps everything. Because when you think yourself as separate and a body, you're going to be miserable. If you think yourself as part of a whole, part of this beautiful mind, you're going to experience more and more of that, more and more of the truth. And so I'm going to leave you there for now. But if you're interested in continuing this conversation with me in any way, check out my website, www.coachtylerthurman.blogspot.com. Reach out to me via email, coachtylerthurman@gmail.com. And I'm happy to have a conversation with you. I do this professionally. I point people in this direction, and their lives transform. My life has transformed with this understanding. So if you want a piece of that, reach out to me, and I'd be happy to talk to you. With all the love in the world, I'll see you next time.